Warning, what you are about to see is real paranormal evidence, caught via audio and photograph. Viewer discretion is advised.
In the mid-1970s, New York City was plunged into terror.
I can't tell you what effect this series of crimes had on the city of New York. People in the area lived in a great deal of fear.
Innocent young couples were being slayed on the streets.
There was no rhyme or rhythm or reason. Had no idea where it was going to pop up next.
Literally everybody who walked the streets were terrified.
The killer called himself the Son of Sam.
When he got the urge to kill, he would scan the streets of the city of New York.
But what made him murder? Was he warped by his experiences?
This was a terribly, pathetically lonely young man.
Or was the Son of Sam born to kill?
These individuals are hardwired so that their killing is part of their sexual arousal pattern.
There was no rhyme or rhythm or reason.
However, there were similarities between the crimes.
Many of the shootings took place in dark lovers' lane areas where, young people might be parking, and a man would approach and open fire.
Clearly a serial sexual murder in my judgment. Take a look at who he's shooting. He's shooting women. He's shooting them in lovers' lanes. These individuals are hardwired so that their behavior, their killing, is part of their sexual arousal pattern. That's why they repeat it, because it is so sexually arousing and sexually stimulating.
On the 30th of January 1977, another shooting. Detective Sergeant Joseph Coffey was assigned to the case.
I was called in to investigate a homicide that occurred in Queens County. It was the homicide of a girl named Christine Freund, and she was sitting in a car with a boyfriend.
26-year-old Christine and her boyfriend John had returned to their car after a night out, when without warning, a gunman opened fire.
What made the Son of Sam killer so dangerous was that he was in the Army for 3 years and was an excellent marksman, especially with rifles.
In late November 1998, Chicago police cordoned off a section of the city's northwest side. Reporters and onlookers gathered on the chance that there might be a gruesome discovery. Police had received a tip that the yard behind this picket fence had been used as a burial ground 20 years earlier by John Wayne Gacy. Investigators dug it up and found nothing at all. And yet the attention lavished on this one bad lead was a fitting postscript to the life of a man who fooled the world while he killed at least 33 people.
Gacy, I'm sure, from wherever he is right now, was laughing hilariously at the people digging, or he's laughing today that they didn't dig in the right place to find something that he's left.
He loved the girls, and they loved him. There's no doubt about that. But his and Carol's relationship was that of a friendship as well as their love for one another.
Yet Carol's affection was not enough for Gacy. He could no longer control his hidden attraction to teenage boys. Something deep inside of him was about to snap. On January 2nd, 1972, Gacy picked up 16-year-old Tim McCoy at the Greyhound bus station. John offered to show the boy the sights, then lured him back to his house, where they engaged in sex. When they were done, Gacy grabbed a kitchen knife and plunged it into the teenager's chest. Then he buried the body in the crawl space under his house.
John Wayne Gacy faced an abusive childhood and conflict over his sexuality. And after being convicted of sexual assault in 1968, it was discovered that John Wayne Gacy would go on to kill 33 young males.
The novel and film Psycho stemmed from a true story. Author Robert Bloch lived not far from the rural Wisconsin crime scene. In his novel, timid Norman Bates has murdered his mother, keeping the corpse around for company. A generation later, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre wove another version of the tale.
What happened was true. The most bizarre and brutal series of crimes in America.
The family of unemployed butchers lures travelers into their den of horror, an isolated farmhouse filled with the remnants of past visitors. One of the lunatics, Leatherface, wears a mask made of human skin and prefers women's clothes.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. After you stop screaming.
The truth is not only stranger than fiction, it is more appalling. The inspiration of these movie madmen was not young and handsome, nor a squealing giant, but a timid little farmer. Edward Gein had lived most of his life in a farmhouse with his mother and his brother Henry outside of Plainfield, Wisconsin. His father died when Ed was a child. Bible-pounding Mother Gein always warned her sons that all women were sinful. Just stay on the farm. Ed considered her a saint. As an adult, Ed's brother Henry started to disagree with this view of Mother. He told the now-grown Ed that he was too attached to their mother, a mama's boy. Henry Gein died shortly after that during a forest fire. Ed was the last person to see him alive. Mother Gein died after a series of strokes in 1945. Ed sealed off her bedroom and the parlor as a weird shrine, living only in his kitchen and his bedroom, immersing himself in books about anatomy, Nazi atrocities, South Sea Island cannibals, and true crime stories. A government subsidy meant he no longer had to tend the farm. Occasionally, he hired himself out to his neighbors. Some of Plainfield's 700 other residents called him Weird Ed. He would give them a funny smile at odd times, but nobody paid much attention to the harmless 5'5" farmer. According to Ed, he convinced another local farmhand named Gus to help him with some work. That work was grave robbing. Old Gus and Ed dug up the bodies of women and carried them back to Ed's farmhouse. Ed told his friend only that he was doing experiments. Few people ever entered this lonely farmhouse. Brave boys would try to peer into the house because Ed said he kept shrunken heads in there. Ed always chased trespassers off his land. The house became unimaginably filthy with layer upon layer of waste, slop, and unidentifiable clutter. Cheap pictures of Jesus on one wall and a mask of human skin on another. Comic books and volumes on embalming. children's toys, and human bones. One night in 1954, Ed walked into a saloon in nearby Pine Grove, deserted except for the owner, Mary Hogan, who physically resembled Ed's mother, but whose body attitude reflected Ed's image of a scarlet woman. Ed shot her with a .22, packed the 51-year-old woman onto a sled, and carted her back home. Ed continued his lonely life, unmolested by outsiders or sanity. Occasionally, local families would ask him to babysit. He was always there to help out. In November 1957, Ed hung around Warden's hardware store in Plainfield. Beatrice Warden was a buxom woman whose shape reminded Ed of his mother. Mrs. Warden's son, Frank, was deputy sheriff and unofficial fire chief. Eddie mentioned in passing that he'd have to buy antifreeze for his truck. On the first day of hunting season, Plainfield's men were out chasing deer. When Frank Warden came back to his mother's store, he found her cash register missing. So was his mother. There was a blood stain on the floor and a receipt for antifreeze. The death of Beatrice Warden appeared to be utterly senseless murder. The sheriff drove out to the Gein farm, finding the shed unlocked. Hanging from the rafters, upside down, was the headless body of Beatrice Warden, slit open like a butchered animal. Gein quietly went into custody, and the full horror of his house came to light. Investigators prowled through the rooms of the filthy Gein home. On the stove was a fresh human heart in a pot, ready to be cooked and eaten. The tops of skulls were hollowed out, used for drinking bowls like the ancient Vikings. Human organs were kept in the icebox. Furniture had been reupholstered with human skin. In a box were Ed Gein's collection of female sex organs, cut from the corpses he had dug up. There were 9 face masks peeled from the heads of the dead. One was identified as Mary Hogan. Vests and leggings sewn together from the skin of cadavers were found. As near as anyone could reckon, there were a total of 15 bodies. In custody, Ed Gein quietly admitted to his ghoulish habits. He only vaguely remembered killing Beatrice Warden and Mary Hogan, and indignantly resented the implication that he had stolen Warden's cash register. He merely wanted to see how it worked. Plainfield suddenly became infamous. Reporters, scavengers, and tourists flocked to the town that boasted a real live ghoul, a man who dug up corpses, ate their organs, and dressed in handmade vests of human skin under the light of the moon. One entrepreneur bought Gein's truck and exhibited it throughout the Midwest for morbid curiosity seekers. Another man planned to turn the Gein farm into a permanent museum of horrors, charging admission for the privilege of being revolted. The farmhouse mysteriously caught fire. Local authorities took their time to get to the scene. That wasn't a surprise. The fire chief was Deputy Sheriff Frank Warden, who had seen his mother's body hanging like a gutted deer in Ed Gein's farmhouse. Ed Gein was put under observation at the Wisconsin State Hospital for the Criminally Insane. Over the years, psychiatrists questioned Gein like a prized trophy. One test had the patient explain familiar sayings. When the doctor said, "A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush," Ed Gein chuckled and said, "If you have a bird in your hand and you squeeze it too hard, you might kill it." The doctors decided Eddie wasn't quite ready for the outside world. He died of old age in 1984. The nurses all agreed that he seemed like a nice, harmless little man.
Ed Gein had a sadistic mindset. He would dig up females in the cemetery, cut off parts of their body and keep them as trophies, and then return the bodies to the cemetery like nothing ever happened.
In 9th grade, in biology class, we had the usual dissection of fetal pigs, and I took the remains of that home and kept the skeleton of it. And I just started branching out, dogs, cats. I suppose it could have turned into a normal hobby like taxidermy. I don't know, it's like, I don't believe I have a split personality, but you know the feeling where you're sort of glad about something, but on the other hand, you're not. That's how it was. It was a relief not to have to keep such a gigantic secret that I had kept for so many years. And once I saw that I had no choice but to face it, I decided to face it head on and make a full confession. So I am glad that the secrets are gone.
In prison, Jeffrey Dahmer was left with Christopher Scarver and an area, you know, and 20 minutes after security guards left, Christopher Scarver murdered both Jesse Anderson and Jeffrey Dahmer. Since with the weight bar in front of the gym, and since Dahmer was a really crazy guy, even these murderers were kind of afraid that this guy might eat us or whatever, so they had to get rid of him as soon as possible.
A man in a mask tied and stabbed them, leaving them for dead.
This is the ace of cases. Zodiac has identified himself to us.
All of the letters sent by the killer have been posted from San Francisco.
This guy is a pathological, psycho killer.
Are you the Zodiac killer?
No, I'm certainly not the Zodiac killer.
Was called with the radio code, meaning a shooting had possibly come down.
Shortly after 10, San Francisco patrolman Armin Palisetti responds to the call and approaches the cab.
It was actually pretty gory. I looked in, and the cab driver was laying down, and his head was basically resting on the floorboard of the car. The car was full of blood. The gentleman's eyes were open, which was a very bad sign, indicating that he was dead.
Palisetti takes down a description of the shooter, a white man, reddish hair, and a crew cut, about 5 feet 10. In the moments after the attack, one patrol comes across such a man, fitting the suspect's general description and walking away from the shooting.
The other unit stopped somebody, a white man, and asked if he had seen anything suspicious or anybody in the area. And that person said, yes, a man just ran into the Presidio.
The patrol lets the man go. Later, many would wonder if they let Zodiac himself slip away into the night.
The conjecture is that this was the Zodiac. Was it? I don't know. He didn't see any blood on that person's clothing. And believe me, based on the crime scene, there would have been a lot of blood on that person.
Back at the crime scene, Paul Stein is pronounced dead.
The case of the Zodiac killer went cold, and no one ever knew who he was, even though he had left letters taunting the police and law enforcement. They could never find his identity, and he's believed by Zodiac authors to have been a follower of the Charles Manson murders and the Unabomber.
Inside this primitive cabin, one man declared war on the world, provoking the greatest manhunt in U.S. history. From 1978 to 1996, he created explosive devices, destroyed lives, and threatened a nation.
You're in your home opening your mail with your family sitting around the table and it explodes. It was terrifying.
How did one man evade capture for almost 2 decades?
I don't think anybody dreamed that we would find a PhD in mathematics. This guy's living with no running water, no electricity, and none of that, yet he's building these bombs.
And what led him to kill in the first place?
We like to think of anyone who commits murder as simply insane, and I thought there was more to Kaczynski than that early on.
Were it not for the selfless act of his devoted family, he might still be at large today.
It felt like such a decisive moment to kind of put my finger down on the spot of the map, realizing that I could be sending my brother to his death.
His name was Ted Kaczynski. He became known to the world as the Unabomber. Spring 1996. Undercover agents from the FBI and other agencies converge on the small town of Lincoln, Montana, and the cabin of Ted Kaczynski. They believe Kaczynski to be one of America's most notorious criminals, the Unabomber. For almost 20 years, his seemingly random bombings have killed and maimed innocent people across the country, and the FBI has been powerless to find him.
This is the work of the Unabomber.
Along with these crimes, his taunting letters to authorities and his anti-technology writings have made him the most wanted man in America. Finally, investigators are on the verge of ending the nation's longest-running crime spree. Between noon and midnight on the 2nd of April, the FBI quietly moves around 100 people into Lincoln, Montana, including special weapons and tactical teams and bomb personnel from the military.
Ted Kaczynski was not an idiot. By the age of 16, he entered in Harvard University, and by the age of 25, he already obtained a PhD and master's. He taught for 2 years at the University of California at Berkeley. This guy was no idiot. He was a pure genius, and you take a pure genius and pit him as a serial killer, he's going to cause a lot of damage.
Heriberto Eddie Seda, also known as the Zodiac Copycat Killer, was born on July 31st, 1967. His area of residence is New York City, New York, USA. Heriberto Eddie Seda also had a passion for reading, especially about guns and violence. Additionally, he loved reading about his favorite serial killers, one of them being the Zodiac. He collected newspaper clippings of the Zodiac in his scrapbook. Seda was also a very religious man. He attended church regularly. He lived with his mother and his half-sister Reyes. Seda's education ended when he dropped out of high school when he was 16 years old after he was suspended for carrying a weapon.
What's in your hand?
A gun?
Give it to me.
What? This is
You
mine.
will give it to me.
It's mine.
You know where you are?
I don't know.
Are you sure?
I don't care.
This is school.
Okay.
You're not supposed to bring guns into school.
Do whatever I want.
Give me your gun.
It's
Give
mine.
me your gun. I am an administrator and you will give me your gun.
You're gonna return back?
Give me your gun. No, give it. You're suspended. Come with me. Go.
Seda felt that he needed to kill his victims because they were bad. They were evil people. Seda wrote a letter to the police, however they dismissed it as nothing but a prank because they had nothing to link it to yet. Seda began killing in 1990. His typical victims were white middle-aged men, along with a few white middle-aged women. Mario Orozco, a Scorpio, was shot in the back in March 8, 1990. He survived. German Montenegro, a Gemini, was shot in the back in March 29, 1990. He survived. Joe Prost, a Taurus, was shot in the back in March 31st, 1990. He survived.
No, I said dollar. Money.
Patricia Fonte, a Leo, was shot twice and stabbed over 100 times in August 10, 1992. She died. Diane Ballard, a Taurus, was shot in the neck in October 1993. She survived. Prost died in the hospital on June 24, 1990 due to the wound. Prost proved to be an awful witness because he kept changing his story. There was a woman who witnessed the shooting, however she refused to cooperate with the police.
Is he really? Remember, this is really important. Remember.
I'm on my deathbed, dude.
Remember, come on. I know you can do it. What does he look like?
Maybe he was African American.
He's African American.
Wait. No, he was white.
He was white?
No,
what?
wait!
This is serious. You better get it right this time.
Hispanic?
Hispanic. Okay.
No! Maybe I...
Doctor. We've lost him.
Seda was arrested later on March 10, 1994, because in his possession he had an illegal zip gun. He cooperated with the police, and because the gun was incorrectly labeled, he walked free a week later. The killings continued for 3 years. He killed 3 and wounded 5. Seda and his 17-year-old sister constantly fought, and on June 18, 1996, Reyes invited a male friend over the house. Enraged, Seda fired at the wall between his room and her room, and fired at Reyes when she tried escaping the house. She was shot in the back. However, she managed to get over to a neighbor who called the police. Before Seda gave in, he fired several shots at the police. However, the police were able to talk him into giving himself up. He was sentenced to life in prison on June 24, 1998.
Eddie Seda gave off the impression that he was a religious man. He lived with his mother and his sister was in New York, but he was a pretty quiet man.
Young men are vanishing.
I was hysterical. I wanted to find my son.
It's almost as if they fell off the face of the earth.
And it seems there's nothing investigators can do to stop it.
When you start hearing the word serial killer, it's even scary to police officers.
Family Secrets, next. Indianapolis, Indiana, July 1993. 32-year-old Roger Goodlett left his mother's house for a gay bar and never came home.
It must have been around 10:30 or so. I just knew something was wrong. So I called Rick, his friend, and I asked him if he'd seen him.
I knew 90% of his friends. I knew where he hangs out at. Nowhere. And that's what got me concerned.
People started calling other people to find out. Nobody had heard from him. That wasn't normal.
After 48 hours, Roger's frantic mother files a missing person report. But in Indianapolis, there is a 30-day waiting period before police will launch a full-scale investigation.
My husband went to work, and he came home, and he said, we can't wait that long. We have to do something.
So they hire Virgil Vandegrift, a sheriff's investigator turned private eye who specializes in missing persons cases. Just a few days into the case, Vandegrift gets a worrisome phone call. Another family wants to hire him. Another family with a missing gay son. His name is Alan Broussard. A year after gay men started disappearing in Indianapolis, a witness comes forward claiming he had an encounter with a possible killer. He'd met the suspect, a white male in his 40s, at a gay bar, and after a few drinks, the man invited the witness back to his place.
The informant was driven way north out of the city to a kind of secluded, what he termed a mansion.
So after the informant got to the house, went inside, and they eventually made it to where there was a swimming pool. He noticed some unusual things, like around the swimming pool were many mannequins. They drank some more alcohol and possibly even some cocaine.
So the informant described them going for a swim in the pool, at which time the man suggested this little trick that would heighten the sexual experience.
The suspect asked the informant if he'd ever tried asphyxiation as a sexual gratification, and he said no, he had not. And he convinced him that it was the highest high you could possibly have and the best orgasm you could possibly have. The suspect wrapped a swimming pool hose around the informant's neck.
Mere seconds from death, he realizes that the suspect has no intention of releasing the hose.
So he faked passing out. When he eventually opened up his eyes, the suspect was extremely surprised that hey, this guy's awake.
The informant thought that maybe some of his missing friends had fallen victim to that same type of experience and not survived the encounter.
Herb Baumeister never faced trial. He committed suicide right after the police found bodies of his victim in his backyard.
Sure, I get angry. I get very, very angry and indignant. I don't like being locked up for something I didn't do, and I don't like my liberty taken away, and I don't like being treated like an animal, and I don't like people walking around and ogling me like I'm some sort of weirdo, because I'm not.
Police believe Bundy's killing spree had begun in 1974, when he was 28 years old, studying law and living adjacent to the University of Washington in Seattle.
He made a very, very positive impression. He was very verbal, articulate, intelligent. I guess if I were to characterize him, he looked like a young Cary Grant.
But at that time, no one could guess that this clean-cut and good-looking young man was about to begin a series of rapes, tortures, murders, and dismemberments that would shock the world.
In 1970, Ted Bundy showed that he had a human side when a 3-year-old boy fell into Seattle's Green Lake and Ted Bundy jumped in to save his life.
When I stand on the mountain and I say, do it, it gets done. If it don't get done, then I'll move on it. And that's the last thing in the world you want me to do.
I knew that people would die. I knew that there would be killing. Our acts cannot be forgiven.
Every one of you out there has tried to kill me for the last 25 years, and I'm still here. Ha, ha, ha. Now what?
In 1967, Charles Manson pleaded and begged with prison officials not to let him out of prison. If the prison authorities would have actually heeded this advice, Sharon Tate and her friends would have never been murdered, and the book Helter Skelter would have never been written.